Welcome to the Zachrilege cast, the one interview podcast that brings the best and brightest of the atheist, skeptic, and just plain cool community to you, to your earbuds, to your iBuds, and all that good stuff. This is episode 35 of the show. I am recording live on November 6, 2015. It's an unusual time. I'm recording on a Friday morning because I need to get a damn show out, because when you get exposure and then you don't actually post a show that same week, exposure means nothing. Although, when it comes to exposure, I'm okay. Anyway, thanks everybody for listening and watching again, including my awesome Patreons and my followers on Twitter and my likes on Facebook and people who just think kindly of me. Send me one of them cool little hearts on Twitter, would you? At Zachrilege. Thanks to Jason Camo for being on last week's show, and I promise I will have real live human beings on next week. I'll try not to wander. When I interview, I usually go about an hour. If I'm talking to myself, I try to top it at 15 minutes. I think that's about all you guys should be able to handle. So the problem with doing a solo show and talking about current events is that current events change a lot. Between the time I originally wrote notes for this and then I actually showed up to do the show, well, a lot has happened. As many Americans don't know, Tuesday was an election day, and in the fine, well, we'll say otherwise in a moment, city of Houston, they, for the third time in 30 years, voted down an anti-discrimination law called HERO. And I know the double negative is confusing. There was a law that was proposed that gave protection to 15 groups, LGBT and more, and the fine marketing geniuses of the right wing, who have been extraordinarily good at lying to America for the past 40 years, followed through and the measure was voted down. Now, this law was going to protect gay people, going to protect trans people, but the ads against them. Now, this is something that I think it's really easy to get angry about, because if you are a human being and breathing, and another human being and breathing doesn't get the same rights as you just because of their sexual orientation or the fact that they're not as gender binary as you are, and even if they are, if they don't go with the gender that they were assigned to at birth, that's pretty bad. Just because you're in charge and you're the quote unquote normal doesn't mean you just can shit on other people. So that's pretty much that. But at the same time, I think we need to pay attention to the really good marketing job this opposition does. What was the main thrust? It was basically these signs that said no men in women's bathrooms. And what the scare tactic was that men were going to say they were women, and not someone who's trans, just a man who decides to go into the bathroom in a famous ad, almost as famous as, going to be as famous as that Daisy ad from the 1964 presidential campaign. Look it up. Basically shows a man wearing a plaid shirt, because that's evil, accosting a poor innocent young woman in a bathroom. Now, first of all, this never happens. And second of all, trans people are trying to blend in. They're not trying to be brought out. And finally, a man can go into a women's bathroom right now. Sure, it's against the law. And if the HERO law had passed, sure, a man could go into a women's bathroom and say, I'm trans. But you know what happens? Due process, the law takes over. And protections would happen to someone who needs it, and protection wouldn't happen to the person who doesn't need it. And by the way, this attaches to this concept of Southern female purity. They are scaring the shit out of people who don't want anyone messing with their fine, pure Southern women. But once the women get past that age, well, once they get married, once they get passed off, sold off, well, they're, the part that makes me most mad about this is the fact that women do support this kind of thinking. They're basically saying, I'm okay as a second-class citizen. And I know there's a lot of nuance involved here, but I'm sorry. That's just the way I feel. And hey, that's why this show exists. So we found out some great news earlier this week. The conference that I attended earlier this year, and many of my podcasting and non-podcasting friends ReasonCon will be back next year. If I have a choice between ReasonCon in Asheville, North Carolina, and the Reason Rally, I think I'm going ReasonCon because it's going to be a smaller group, it's going to be more intimate, and I have this connection now with it. So I think it'd be a lot of fun. So I encourage everybody to look it up. I believe they have a Facebook page now, and the 3rd, they're starting to plan ahead. And the good thing is you can book a hotel room for it, and you're allowed to cancel 48 hours in advance, so that makes it easy, especially for those of us like me who's within driving distance. You know, it's a good, I think, 5-hour drive from where I live in Atlanta. I just wrote the word Bangladesh in my notes just to really quickly bring up the fact that another atheist secular blogger was hacked to death in Bangladesh. And you think, why the fuck do we do this? Why do we talk about religion all the time when we're living in a country where we're pretty much okay, and the worst thing that happens is a football coach tries to proselytize on a football field, or an invocation happens at a city council meeting? Well, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and if people get the theocracy they want, and by the way, they won't get the theocracy they want, but they might get the theocracy, things like this happen. People who are not religious are in trouble, and around the world are actually risking their lives for this. And we have to realize these sober moments and go, can we support people? Can we offer this? And can we say fuck you to anybody who says, well, if you talk out too much about a religion, you're kind of asking for it. That victim blaming crap needs to die. Transition, I cannot afford to get the royalty-free music, so I just sing instead. Transition. Other shows do it. I wanted to see if I could do it. I don't know. Anyway, on Sunday night, I gave up my usual cult football watching to be on the No Religion Required show. Ever since this show, which has been around, Bobby C started it, I think early last year, and Miss Ashley joined at about episode 15. They were doing a recorded show, and Bobby was spending about as much time as he does at his job editing it, which I don't have the patience for that. That's why I do this. And it became, over time, a live show on Sunday nights, which, of course, was always a terrible time for me to join in. I've only actually listened to it live once. I tell people, I will support your show, but I'm not going to guarantee you that A, I'm going to listen live, and B, that I'm going to listen to every episode, and C, that I'm going to listen to every minute of your show, especially when you go 3 hours plus. But I love those two. I've met them a few times in person. We actually had dinner together with Hugh Mann and such. I got to meet my wife, and that was an interesting experience, but we'll talk about that another time. But they invited me to be on the show, and I think I was semi-jokingly saying to them, hey, when are you going to have me on the show? I'm the guy who pesters you on Twitter and takes your quotes out of context, because in shows like No Religion Required and Dogma Debate, they're so fucking long that there's so much stuff to take out of context, and I think the hosts know that and occasionally throw you a bone, as it were. So Bobby reached out to me, and let me tell you about the glamorous world of being on podcasts. It's not glamorous. Usually when you get invited on a show, unlike on my show where I'm like, please be on my show in 5 minutes, they actually, give you at least a week's notice and get your personal information and a little bio and some stuff you're going to talk about. And then, of course, you have to figure out what your Skype password is, because I only use Skype when I appear in other people's podcasts. And about 6:30, I turned off football. Somehow I disconnected myself. It was a little dizzying at first. But I showed up, we did a little pre-show, and then we were on. And actually, I make the joke about a 3-hour show, but I was only on the show for about an hour and a half, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. And the first 30 minutes were all about me, which is, I like interviewing other people because I want to hear their stories, and I don't really feel terribly comfortable telling my story because you know your story and you've told it before. So you feel like you're in a show, you're like, I'm saying something I've said before, but you don't realize that there are people listening to this show who don't listen to my show and have never heard of me. And hey, maybe my story is interesting. And more importantly, what's interesting is the people I'm going to bring onto my show to interview. and just get that exposure out there. So it was cool. I'm glad Bobby's feeling better after that accident he had last week, and Miss Ashley got her promotion, so that was cool. And Jeremiah gets to keep being a student and not, being productive in society, haha. And I got to hear Jeremiah's science segment. Unfortunately, I disconnected before the final segment of the show, which turned out to be an extra hour, because I listened to that part the following day. I only listen to my show long enough to make sure the audio is okay, and then I say, nope, I'm done. So in the final hour, Bobby kind of snuck up on Ashley with a story about, it's about biblical marriage roles. And what's interesting is this story itself has become a story in the atheist podcasting community over the past few days. When the story was first on the No Religion Required show, it was also on Barroom Atheist. It was also on Cognitive Dissonance and possibly other shows that I'm not aware of. This show is about biblical marriage roles, and the key part that people would bring out of this article was, it's okay to rape your wife. And if your wife is looking upset because you're in the mid-rape, just don't look her in the eyes. And it turned out, of course, ultimately, look him up on Facebook. I'll have to spell this on my show notes. Along Black Cock. That's his actually, I think it's Along and then Black Cock. And the spelling makes it, for a second, you don't know what it is. But he's another podcaster, and I probably should post a link to his show on the notes. That the site, the Biblical Gender Role site that they actually grabbed this story from, was actually a Poe. It's not a real story. It's not by a real religious person. The problem is, in today's society, is there's just so much fake stuff out there that you don't know what's real. And the bottom line is the gender roles. The story talks about how men want sex all the time and women are kind of about it. And occasionally women don't really want to have sex, are not interested, but they really should accommodate the man, is a thing. And it actually was a bit of a trigger on Ashley, who talked about her previous relationship and how she was repeatedly abused. And this is kind of the way her boyfriend treated her during this time period. And this is how a lot of women are treated. A lot of women are treated like absolute shit by their men, and they're treated like shit by their society, and they think there's no other option. And sometimes there isn't, and that's very sad. And so even though there was the controversy, I mean, it brought up a lot of things in atheist podcasting. The fact that everybody seems to grab the same stories because they're really good clickbait. They're very good marketing, I guess, in a way, much like that scare tactic about the men and women's bathrooms. These particular articles, I think, are created in order to get this kind of attention from religious people and non-religious people. But there is a tendency to talk about the same article. But on Barroom Atheist, they were joking about the article and kind of laughing at it. And on No Religion Required, they were kind of joking about it. And then it became a real story about Ashley's past. And that's one reason why that show is one of the best, is because they're not afraid to talk about the personal stuff. They're okay with getting that stuff out there, and it's going to be a bit messy, but they're going to, turn into the skid and make it work and be fine. So I thought I'd just quickly talk about my podcast guest appearance history. I was on Barroom Atheist last November. I recorded the show in November and didn't play for like 3 weeks, and it was just me with some beer, and I had taken notes, and I was typing the whole time. And during the middle of the show, Bill's like, "You can't type." So that's one thing I had to learn while being a guest on a show, is take your notes, write them down, make sure you can read them. That's why I put my notes on the screen closest to me and my face on the screen furthest away from me, so I can actually read what I've written down. And just have your notes, and occasionally you just gotta go. You can't have everything pre-written because it's gonna sound that way. So that was fun. And then I get to be on the Imaginary Friends podcast, which Jake Farwarden and I think Nick Morganmore was on there at that time. That was a few months later. When I interviewed Andrew Gardo, we did a little show exchange where I was on his show and he was on mine, and that was a little rough because it was Sunday night at like 11:30, and I'm a early bedtime guy. Recently, of course, a couple weeks ago on Beyond the Trailer Park, which was fun, and another show that goes on and on and on, but is a fun ride all the way through, and no religion required. And we'll see what happens in the future. Because you always do this show. The point of this version of my show, the non-interview, is me to kind of talk about the interviews I've done and talk about myself. And anytime you're on a show, you think, oh, here's where I hit a really good point, and here's where I could have been funnier, and you always think you could have done better. You always think your sound could have been better, or you think that you could have been more interesting. You're afraid of just like, I mean, it wasn't great that when they asked me who was going to be on my show yet, I was like, I don't know, because that's the way it is. And other people are obviously more organized than me, but that's okay. Now, I figured I'd do transition. We're gonna transition to another story. Okay, I am pushing my time, so I'll try to speak quickly. Welcome to the Football Corner. I am a fan of football, and over time I've realized that football involves the same kind of groupthink that religion does, and it's a little bit like being in church, and it's a little scary how everybody kind of ends up having the same thoughts. You can see this happening and being used for evil. We do know football players are notoriously religious because you have to conform, you have to do what the coach says, and many coaches are just violent pastors in training. There was an issue, actually this was I think it was near Seattle. Coach Joe Kennedy. I actually wrote an article about this in my regular normal guy blog, zachonsports.com, where I usually talk about sports, but in this case I talked about religion and sports. Oh crap. About Joe Kennedy, the assistant high school coach, I believe it's near Seattle, who continuously would pray after a game. And his contention was that he was doing so as a private individual, not as a football coach, which is a bunch of bullshit. And I think we know it, and I'm pretty sure he knows it. And the Liberty Institute, the greasy lawyers who are helping him out, also know it, but they're trying to get away with it on purpose. So he would say that he was doing this prayer after a game in his capacity as a private citizen. Now, why do you pray privately in the middle of a football field? Why don't you pray privately at home? Do you think God cares whether you wait an hour for you to get home, even take a shower before you pray? God will be like, hey, I'm waiting, I'm cool. At least the nice version of the Christian God would definitely do that. So if a coach is praying, a football coach, you pray too, because if you don't, you play intramurals. So he was called up by the FFRF, and he's been suspended with pay because he said he wouldn't do it anymore, and he kept doing it. And that's the new Christian martyrdom of the current situation, where people want to be martyrs, but they actually don't want any consequences. Like, this guy has no consequences. He's still getting paid. He's suspended. He's probably going to keep his job, much like Kim Davis. Has she lost a minute of pay because of this whole situation? I don't think so. So Ben Watson, a tight end of the New Orleans Saints, tweeted that because God's on the money and in our society, that should be no big deal to have it on the football field. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't say the same tune if you were talking about the coach doing an Islamic prayer. Maybe not. Then there's, I saw on the NFL Network, they do these hour-long documentaries about players. And one was about Steve Largent. It was a great story, a nice guy, but the whole, sorry about the microphone thing there, good Christian boy thing rubs me the wrong way. He was a football player with the Seahawks, Hall of Famer, led the league in receptions by the time he retired, got in Congress after his career, and he ran for governor. And this is a very Christian thing, during the time he ran for governor, he said, God told me to run for governor. Does that sound familiar? This was in the 80s, by the way. He lost, and then after the fact, he decided God wanted me to run, but he wanted me to lose. God can't be wrong or the brain breaks. Quick transition. We'll talk about actual podcasts now. There's a change in that one of my beloved podcasts and the only podcast that I actually donate money to, Coronify Me, is dead. Long live Coronify Me. Paul is rebranding a show, which is a rarity in the atheist podcasting biz, as the Q Podcast. And you can go to the Q Podcast on Twitter and find it. So what is this new Q show all about? As a podcaster, I understand that shows go through transitions. The show I'm doing today is the show I originally intended to do before I got over my social anxiety and actually invited people to talk to me because I knew they wouldn't touch me with their atheist germs. Paul's show started with him reading the Quran, proving that all religious texts are a billion times more boring than they're marketed to be. And he also did parody songs. Paul really stepped up his game when he started doing interviews with ex-Muslims, letting us know that this religion doesn't fuck around when it comes to messing with people and threatening their lives. That's why I supported the show, and I will support the show in the new format. Basically, the new format, he's going to keep reading the Quran. He's probably not going to do those interviews anymore, but he's going to get a little help from his friends to keep it going. Because it's hard to be a podcasting magnet like he is. I don't know. That's the way to explain to it. But whatever Paul does, he'll put 100% of himself into the job. So go, Paul. I think ultimately he's going to be like a 70s TV producer with a dozen shows under his umbrella. He'll remember me when he's huge, or not. I do want to mention that while reaching out to Paul to get a few details about his new show, that he told me about a new kind of, podcast gathering. I feel like in the atheist community, every once in a while, you get these kind of coalition of podcasts that kind of band together and give each other promotion and become this sort of network. So this new network is called Secular Outreach, and it is at Secular Outreach on Twitter. And it's run by Matt, the Apostle of In the Name of God podcast. And it's just a few shows that exist on that realm. Waiting for Wrath, who I interviewed a while back, they're on there. Naked Mormonism is on there. Atheism 101, and I guarantee I'm going to forget somebody, so I'm just going to stop right now. So you're probably wondering, am I going to actually have human beings on this show in the future? Well, yes. I am in negotiations with America Darling Curl of the Godless Drinking Hour. Possibly I'll get the 3 hosts of that show on. As soon as I heard the name of the podcast, you're getting on my show. Right now I'm drinking Pepsi Max. Sorry, it is 8:30 in the morning. And also talking to Matt, the Apostle of In the Name of God, the podcast, to be on as well. So I went a little bit longer than expected, but hey, you guys love me. You'll support me, right? So thanks again to all the listeners, to the people who are following me or subscribing on YouTube, to the likes on Facebook, to the follows and the retweets and all that good stuff on Twitter. Thank you. I love being a part of this community. I like being able to openly talk about atheism at least once a week, and more importantly, talking with other people and getting the word out. So follow me on Twitter, like my Zachrilege Cast page on Facebook, send all hate mail to zachrilege.cast@gmail.com. You can find Zachrilege on YouTube. It will try to spell the name differently, but trust me, this is how you spell it. So I want to say thanks again to me, but more to Jason and the other 30+ people who have been on my show. It's a lot of fun. So stay skeptical, and I love all of y'all.